Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies. Protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week, Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It enables security teams to detect risky user activity, investigate incidents in minutes, and effectively respond. Get your free trial at observeit.com/securityweekly. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Quick announcement before we get started. We're currently running our annual listener feedback survey. Please visit securityweekly.com, click the survey tab, and select 2019 listener survey. Submit your responses to help shape content here on the show. Also, our new website is live. When you go to securityweekly.com, you can check out all of the new sorting and filtering functionality. It's basically in response to previous surveys where our listeners said, you have too much content. Help me filter and sort it so I can find what I am most interested in. And you can do that on securityweekly.com. Our interview for this segment is with Amin. He is at Ping Identity today, currently the CTO for the West, helping customers with their IAM strategy, zero trust architecture, and modeling for a privacy-first approach. It is the zero trust architecture that we want to hone in on today. Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And it's interesting, when we were talking, you had mentioned how we view identity today. And it's interesting, as Matt and I talk about the topic of identity, we've really brought it to the forefront of everyone's security strategy today. So it's very timely to talk about maybe some of the ways in the past where we think about identity, but it's not really the full picture.
Yes. So, the traditional approach to identity was to use identity as a mechanism to just let you into the system or to do some basic identification. But it has really evolved, and now identity is fundamental to providing personalization, right? And to empowering users so that your consumers and your users, are getting the right information. And also, personalization is adding that extra value into what the user sees, everything from content to a targeted advertisement to targeted product searches to targeted services, and that makes it more personal. So it has really come a long way from that, the early days when you used identity for nothing more than just trying to get access to some kind of a data store.
Yeah, and somewhat protect that access, right? If you, a couple of weeks ago or months ago now, the person who created the password had passed away. I apologize, I don't remember the person's name. However, you can Google that and find it, right? What they said was they were on a shared system in a mainframe kind of style environment, and all of the researchers had their own files, and they needed a way to prevent researchers from looking at each other's files, so came up with the username and password, which let them into the system, and they could only see their files. In that environment, it worked great, right? And everyone loved the idea of the password. We've come so much farther since then, right?
True. And there were actually two aspects, right? I mean, if you look at those early systems, early mainframe systems, when the password was first invented, it first of all, the room was the computer, right?
Yeah.
The computer was not something we carry in our pocket. It was a whole room with a lot of spinny things. So you had to first get access to the room, and then you had to know what you were doing.
Yeah.
And then you would enter the password. So there were multiple controls in place, and what has happened over time is that as those controls have gone away, as those boundaries have shifted, we basically are left with this one static variable called the password and a discrete event, which is called authentication. And we take these two one-time things and rely on them like, they're the best thing since sliced bread.
Right. As if they represent the user's identity. And as many attackers and pen testers alike will tell you, it's very easy to spoof someone's identity because oftentimes you just need their username and password. And there are so many ways to get that pretty easily in a lot of environments.
Correct. Or you can do recovery. And that was the other thing that has shifted, right? When the password was first invented, and then recovery methods to prove who you are if you forgot your password were invented. Well, we didn't have Facebook. Nobody could go to social media and find out what your dog's name was, or what your grandma's name was, or where you were born, or what street you lived in. So a lot of those mechanisms have basically outlived their usefulness.
Yeah, it's very true.
And the problem, I think, has only gotten worse as we think about the user is really the new perimeter. To the mainframe example, right? It was in a room, it had controls. The user is everywhere now. It is the new perimeter in a lot of respects, and the user's interaction with various applications to gain access to data is where I think this only gets harder to manage, because now I can have a user with a phone access multiple applications, access multiple pieces of data. The old controls of the perimeter, the room, even the computer are completely abstracted away in that model, and which makes it harder.
So I would take it one step further, and I'd like to say that the perimeter used to be defined as a static perimeter, right? And one of the things, in saying that the user is the perimeter, you're right, the user is the perimeter, but let's not make it static also. So the perimeter doesn't go away. The perimeter is becoming ephemeral. It is forming, deforming, and reforming in different ways all the time. So if I am accessing, service A from my laptop, from my home, the device reputation, the IP reputation, the behavior, and my credentials, all of those things play a part. If I'm accessing my bank from my mobile application, from my mobile phone, using the bank's application, using native authentication capabilities on the mobile phone like biometrics, different risk associated with that, different trust level associated with that. So I like to say that the perimeter is ephemeral rather than in one place or attached to one thing, person, device, or user agent.
And what's interesting, we've seen this happen over time. At least I think security professionals like ourselves tend to notice that probably more so than people not in our field, right? That when, let's take Google as an example, and to kind of build on your example, Barbara, is that if I log in from my desktop, that I log in from any time, every time, and when I'm working from home and I haven't rebooted in a while or even closed my browser down, that they're collecting artifacts and all's good, right? As soon as I change something, I go to a mobile phone or I come here to work and I apply patches and reboot. Now I have to do some extra authentication. If I get a new phone, like I just did, right? I mistakenly got the Pixel 4. I know it's not a mistake. It's not great, but I get the new phone and it's like, well, hold on. I don't recognize this device at all. You got to give me your username, your password, and you got to give me your physical two-factor before I let you log in and get to all of your stuff. So I think there are certainly already systems doing this. And as a user, I really like it, right? It brings convenience, but it also has a lot of great aspects of security, that the identity is not just the credentials, right? Or the two-factor, right? There's environmental factors that are played into it. And I think that's the really important part of this segment. And oftentimes what people miss about zero trust is that it's very effective means for verifying someone's access to something that goes beyond just one single thing that they have to prove.
True. And I always like to use, physical examples and examples from the physical side that we are already familiar with, which are kind of operating in that same model. So when we all go to the airport, there are a lot of passive security mechanisms or signals that are coming in that form the opinion of whether we're going to be taken into secondary questioning, or we're going to go through a TSA pre-line. And those things are everything from, when you bought your ticket, how you bought your ticket, how long have you been with the airline, are you a frequent flyer, are you buying a one-way ticket, are you buying, a return, is your company buying it, the credit card you're buying it, how long have you had it? In some countries, they even notice and observe and record how you get to the airport. So, depending on, whether you drove your car to the airport, parked in long-term parking, or whether you took a cab, puts a different profile and different risk factor on. All of that happens in the background, right? And then you go through a layered model. It's not like I go and check in and that's the only, time. This would be similar to saying, oh, I gave you my username and password, and now I can go anywhere in the airport in any area. That's not true. When I check in, I get a derived credential, which is a boarding pass. I take that boarding pass plus my government ID, and I go through security. That gets checked again before I board the plane. Neither of those things gives me access to secure areas because I need a different credential for that. So context is important, and passive security signals and distributed nature of credentialing is important in that area. We just have to apply the same principles to logical security now, for our computers, for our systems that we interact with, for our data, and that's really what zero trust is all about.
Mm-hmm. I think some take it almost, and we have to be careful we don't go too far to the extreme and make it too hard for the user to go anywhere and do anything, right? Because there's definitely a balancing act here as well, right?
Oh, definitely. I always tell people that if you put too many roadblocks, or if you create too much friction for your users, they will find a way around it, right? Human beings are actually we're very adaptive, and it's like putting a boulder in a river, and the river will find a way around it, right? And we do the same thing. We find ways around obstacles. So it has to be natural, it has to be transparent, and it has to be friction free, right? The reason biometrics, thumbprints and facial recognition is so common now is because the mobile phone companies actually made it easy to use. I could enroll it easily, and I can use it. All I have to do is look at my phone and I'm done. All I have to do is put my finger on it and I'm done. I still remember back in mid-90s, I was with a different company, and we were doing a healthcare solution that required fingerprint authentication. And the enrollment process was cumbersome. The verification process was cumbersome. And you had to have the right kind of device, the right kind of sensor, and the right kind of device driver. All these things made it very hard for somebody to do it. So what ended up happening was that they would, this is a true story, the head nurse would go in this clinic, and they would log in using their thumbprint, so the doctors didn't have to do that. And they would open the session and keep the session open for the whole day, right? They found a way around it. So you're right. you can add friction, but add friction at the right time for the right amount of friction, and try to use as many passive signals as possible.
Yeah.
And those scenarios still exist today because my wife's a nurse, so I know that works. And I also remember the old Lenovo laptops where you had the finger and you kind of pulled the finger down, and it would work most of the time, but every once in a while it didn't work, and then you had to remember your password to log in. Yeah.
And those were easily
you had to move your finger down at the right pace every single time for it to work. So
and easily defeated with Silly Putty.
It was way ahead of its time, but again, the new systems have really commoditized the use of biometrics, and I think it's going to get more and more, where things are going to get more transparent, things are going to be more easy to use, and we're going to embrace them in a more collaborative manner.
And I think
go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, I mean, when we think about zero trust for a second, it requires an understanding of a lot of different variables. And you as the user, the credentials you're using, the application you're accessing, the device you're accessing it for, how easy has this gotten? Or are we still, is it still cumbersome for people to actually deploy and integrate these pieces together to get us to that zero trust architecture? How close are we actually?
I would say it's not easy, right? Easy is we've all seen that ad, the easy button. Zero trust is still a set of principles, right? And I always tell people there is no company out there, no budget that says, oh, I have a zero trust project or I have a zero trust budget. Zero trust is a set of principles that you should apply to open up your business, to open up your data. And there are different places to start with zero trust. So there are some fundamental rules that you should follow, right? No unauthenticated packet ever touches the wire. So identification and authentication become very, very important. Now, once you have done the identification or authentication, you have to do this constant monitoring, or and have a feedback loop. So Gartner calls that, the CARTA system, where you're constantly monitoring and then creating a feedback loop to do mitigation. So there are tools available for authentication, obviously, identification, identity proofing. There's tools available to look at the behavior on your endpoint, the ability of your user agents, the ability to light up the network. So, companies like Zscaler or other folks who bring excellent capabilities to the table for software-defined perimeters, where the network is not even lit up until you have authenticated. And then, you're down to the data layer and the entitlements. What are you entitled to, and how fine-grained that entitlement is? And then, the security of the individual application, and how do you tag or put metadata on the data itself, so that you can look to, during the extraction, put the right controls, the right policies, and user consent or peer-to-peer consent. Now, all of these things are actually different technologies, different companies. And that's the challenge still, is that when you try to pull this together and deploy this, one, you're dealing with multiple vendors, and two, you're still dealing with multiple technologies, and sometimes they don't all work together. So it is not that easy still. My advice always to folks is pick a place to start with. And the ideal place, in our opinion, obviously, is to start with identification, authentication, light up your network, so that now this is going into access, and then start working on your entitlements, and try to use vendors that are using standards like OpenID Connect or OAuth, so that at least you can make the claims and the identity to be as portable as possible.
Barbara, do you start these projects by thinking about who are your most privileged users, what your most sensitive data is? Is it a combination or something completely different?
That's a good question. So you can start with defining who your most privileged users are, but there is a danger with that too, and the danger is Bobbin basement, or anybody else who is going to get a spear phishing email, and those attacks are getting very sophisticated. And then the bad actor leverages that person to then start moving laterally through your organization. So that person might not be the privileged user, but they become the conduit to move laterally across the organization. And that's why I caution people to don't think of privileged user or solving for privileged user as the secret sauce. If you're gonna do proper identification or authentication, do that for all your users, rather than just for privileged users. The second aspect that you mentioned about understanding where your data is and what kind of data you have, that is definitely one of the first things you should do, because not only for zero trust, but also because of privacy regulations and just being a good data steward. So understanding where your data is, and more importantly, understanding how your data is flowing in your system, right? What information is being passed to your partners for business reasons, or your affiliates, and what information is flowing within your backend systems to get the job done, from a business logic perspective. So understanding both the data placement, what data you have, and then the data flow is equally important.
I'd say it's one of the most important things, right? If you don't understand, first of all, what constitutes sensitivity of the data and what those different levels are, and then where that is and who has access to it and where it travels, right? It's like the first part of really any security architecture kind of meeting in design is understanding your data.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised how many people.
Yeah, I know. We can sit here and say that all day long, right?
Which is why I always say app user data, right? Data flows through applications. Users gain access to that data through those applications. And if you don't understand those three core components, how do you protect anything? And the other thing, Bobber, right, which I agree with 100%, is don't look at just the privilege access use case, right? All identity and access is important. Privilege is just an additional set of, I think, controls that you need to put on that environment. But I wouldn't treat privilege differently than the normal identity and access, because a normal user could, as you said, be the conduit to an attack just as easily as a privileged user.
True.
Barbara, totally what are some of the ways people are using Ping and other providers in kind of this space that really impressed you, like a customer success kind of story in a generic manner? Obviously, you don't have to name customers.
So we have, like I said, because of the different aspects that come into play, people are trying to figure out how to leverage the different vendors and bring them together. We have customers that leverage us for the identification and authentication aspect, and then they have built their own in-house mechanisms for endpoint security, and then they combine those two things, and the endpoint security is also providing a signal to the accessing system that Ping provides, and kind of create that dynamic session capability. We've got some customers who are focused on it from a dynamic, software-defined perimeter perspective, in which case Ping acts again as the authentication authority before the network is lit up, and in that particular scenario, the integration we have with our software-defined perimeter partners goes one step further, that if a user is removed from a certain group and the session is alive, the the software-defined perimeter actually is notified that this user is no longer or should no longer have access to this application because they're no longer in this group or no longer in this role. And that session is terminated. So there is a constant validation happening, which is one of the fundamental things of zero trust. That session is terminated in real time and not waiting for the next time the user tries to log in that they would lose that access.
That's great. Well, that means the nurse loses her session for all the doctors on that floor.
Yes.
Exactly right.
They're gonna have to redo their own authentication.
Right. But that is, it's interesting. Probably 15 plus years ago, we were very much looking at that specifically in the university space for NAC-based solutions. How do we it wasn't so much about the user as it was their machine, right? When network worms were running around, we're like, well, we need to validate that machine's not infected and validate that it has this patch, because if it doesn't, once it gets on the network, it will be likely infected, right? And that technology that long ago was super difficult. Like, I feel like the technology it was just too early to implement. But fast forward to today, and it sounds like from your accounts and others, right, that technology is very much in play and awesome that we can implement that today.
True. There's different vendors that continuously monitor the state of the machine at the end, right? But now it's not just the machine, the NAC. It's also the user agent, right? Whether that user agent happens to be my browser or in a native application, or I'm basically making API calls, right? And I just put Postman on my system because I've looked to see how the application was talking to the back end, and I'm bypassing the application front end and trying to probe the system. So all of those things can now be monitored. And then a mitigation plan can be put in place, or at least they can be monitored and audited so that you can create a mitigation plan.
Right. That's awesome. Fantastic. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you. For our listeners that want to learn more, you can go to securityweekly.com/ping. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take a short break. Come back with our next interview, so stay tuned.